The wind howled through Peterson Hill like it was mourning the dead, not soft, not gentle. It shrieked, ripping through cypress and bone, tearing at the veil clutched tight in Cynthia Jacobson's hand. Her black dress clung to her legs like morning silk, soaked with sweat, grit, and something more bitter, rage. She stood alone before the crooked pine cross marking where they'd buried her husband, Marshal Lewis Jacobson. No preacher, no mourners, just her and the wind and the flies that wouldn't leave the blood-soaked dirt. He hadn't died clean. They left him in the street like garbage, bullet in his throat, boot missing, and a look in his eyes like he'd seen the devil before he dropped. The town said it was a robbery, a drunken card game gone bad, but Cynthia knew better. They lied. They all lied. Behind her, the town of Peterson Hill curled its lip in shameful silence. Doors closed when she walked by. Friends turned strangers. Even the sheriff, who once called Lewis his brother, wouldn't look her in the eye anymore. And high up on the ridge, a lone figure sat quiet in the saddle. Thomas Boone, rifle across his lap, hat low, watching her like a man carrying his own ghosts. He'd known Lewis once, rode with him maybe, fought beside him when things still made sense. Now he watched the widow like she was a fire he couldn't touch, too bright, too dangerous, too damn honest. Cynthia knelt at the grave, whispering something the wind snatched away. Then she stood, not soft, not grieving. She turned like a woman made of iron and ashes. If the Lee Granger gang thought her tears made her weak, they hadn't met the kind of widow who sharpened grief into a weapon. Not yet. The sheriff's office reeked of stale whiskey and cowardice. Cynthia stood in the doorway, fists clenched, black gloves creaking with each breath she swallowed down. Behind the sheriff's desk, Emmett Durling didn't bother to stand. He leaned back in his chair like a man nursing a hangover and hoping the world wouldn't notice. His badge hung crooked on his vest, dulled with time and disuse. "I want the Lee Granger gang arrested," Cynthia said, her voice low but steady. Emmett scratched his beard and exhaled slow, like he had all day to waste. "That's so. They killed my husband in broad daylight, in the middle of town, and you didn't even chase 'em." He finally looked up, and there was something in his eyes, something like shame, twisted and worn thin. "Ain't as simple as that, you know it. Your husband. He got mixed up in something he shouldn't have." Cynthia's eyes flared. "He was trying to clean this place up, and got himself dead for it." Silence stretched between them, sharp as a drawn knife. Emmett looked away first. "I ain't got the men to take on Granger," he muttered. "And even if I did, I ain't keen to die over a dead man's war. You'd be smart to let it lie, Miss Jacobson." "Marshal Jacobson," she corrected. "He died wearing the badge you disgrace." She turned on her heel and walked out before she said something she couldn't take back. The sun hit her like a furnace as she stepped into the street. The town square was a ghost of itself, shutters drawn, eyes peeking from curtains, boots scuffling but never stopping. Peterson Hill had once been a proud stop along the cattle trail. Now it was a husk held together by silence and secrets. Cynthia's boots kicked dust as she passed the old saloon, the post office, the general store where no one met her eyes. The townsfolk didn't need to speak to tell her what they thought. She could see it in the way they turned away, in the whispers. They didn't bother to hush. She was becoming a problem. They wanted her quiet. They wanted her small, but they'd buried that version of her 6 feet down with Lewis. She walked to the cabin she and Lewis had shared. The porch boards groaned under her step. Inside, the place was too still. His rifle still hung over the hearth. His boots were still by the door, dust gathering at the toes. She stared at them for too long. In the bedroom, she opened the chest at the foot of their bed. She pulled out a wrapped bundle of letters Lewis had written her during his travels. She untied the ribbon with shaking hands, then stopped cold as something fell loose from the folds. A worn slip of paper, folded twice. It wasn't a letter. It was a list. Names, places, amounts of money scrawled beside each one. Most of them had question marks. Others had X's. A few she recognized, ranchers, shopkeepers, even the bank manager. She stared at the paper, heart thudding. This was what Lewis died for. Not a bar fight, not a misunderstanding, a ledger, a record of bribes, a map of rot that ran through Peterson Hill like a disease. A knock at the door made her jump. Her hands went to the paper, stuffing it back inside the bundle as she crossed to the front window. It wasn't the sheriff. It was him. Thomas Boone. Leaning on the porch rail like he'd always belonged there, his hat low, jaw set like granite. "You're poking at things better left buried," he said as she opened the door. She stared him down. "Then why are you here?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked toward the ridge above town. "Because someone's watching you," he said. "And it ain't me this time." Cynthia's blood turned to ice. The game had started, and the rules were about to break. The sky was bruised purple when the quiet came. Cynthia Jacobson sat on her front porch with a shotgun across her lap and a tin cup of coffee gone cold. She hadn't lit a lamp, didn't dare. The prairie wind whispered things the night wasn't supposed to know. Coyotes were quiet, even the crickets held their breath. That kind of hush only meant one thing out here. Something was watching. She didn't flinch when the horses came. 4 of them. They rode slow, like shadows crawling across the earth, their hooves muffled by pine needles and damp dirt. No torches. No talk. Just the creak of leather and the sharp stink of men who'd lived too long without fear. Cynthia could smell the whiskey before she saw their faces. The Lee Granger gang. She stood before they reached the gate. "Evenin', widow," Lee Granger said as he dismounted. He looked more preacher than outlaw, slick hair, silver tongue, and a smile that never reached his eyes. "We was just passing through. Thought we might pay our respects." "You've no respect to give," Cynthia said coldly, thumb brushing the hammer of her shotgun. Lee laughed. "Oh, we give what we can, and take what we're owed." He stepped forward, hands out like he was offering communion. Behind him his men fanned out, each one lean, rough, eyes like coiled wire. One of them, younger than the rest, looked away when Cynthia met his gaze. "We're just here for what your husband took," Lee said. "You hand that over, and we'll be on our way." "He didn't take anything." "Then maybe you did." The next moment came fast. Her shotgun rose, but one of the men was faster. A boot slammed into her chest. The gun flew. Cynthia hit the porch rail hard, breath torn from her lungs. She tried to get up. They didn't let her. Calloused hands grabbed her arms, twisted them behind her back. Her legs kicked once, then twice, connecting with someone's shin. But it didn't matter. They were stronger. They'd done this before. "Easy now," Lee murmured, crouching beside her as the others bound her wrists with leather cord. "Ain't nobody wants to hurt you, but I've buried enough men to know when something's been hid. And your man hid something, widow. We just want it back." "I don't know what you're talking about," she hissed, tasting blood in her mouth. Lee studied her for a beat, then stood. "Tie her good. We ride before moonrise." They dragged her to a horse like she was a sack of grain, threw her across the saddle and tied her legs under the belly. The world tilted, spinning in dust and pain. From the ridge above, a rifle scope glinted. Thomas Boone watched it all. He didn't move, didn't breathe, not yet. He'd tracked the gang from the town's edge, knew they were circling her like buzzards. But he hadn't expected them to move so soon. And now they had her. He should ride away, leave it alone. She wasn't his problem. She was just a name connected to a man who once gave him a second chance. That was all, nothing more. But still, he stayed. Watched. The gang disappeared into the tree line. their laughter sharp and cruel in the stillness. Thomas waited a full minute, then two, before lowering the rifle and backing away from the ledge. There was a place he knew, an old canyon pass with a narrow bridge of rock. If he moved fast, he could beat them there, set the kind of welcome they'd never forget. Below him, the pine trees swallowed the last echo of hooves, and in that moment Thomas Boone made his choice. The moon was a pale coin hanging low over the jagged ridgeline like it might fall at any moment. Thomas Boone moved through the trees with the silence of a man who'd hunted both deer and men, and knew the difference. Tonight he was hunting the kind that bled lies instead of blood. The gang had taken the long pass, riding deeper into the pines. They wouldn't risk town roads with Cynthia in tow. Not yet. Not until they had what they came for. Money they were sure she had, or thought Lewis had stashed before he died. Thomas knew better. He crouched by a split boulder and ran his fingers along the stone's cold face. The canyon pass was up ahead, narrow. One way in, one way out. If he could beat them there, he could even the odds. He didn't need to kill them all, just rattle the nest enough to pry her loose. He set down his saddlebag and pulled out the tools of his old trade, a spool of wire, a small jar of blasting powder, and 3 sticks of dynamite he'd kept from his day's working rail. He hadn't touched them in years, hadn't needed to. But tonight wasn't about need, it was about debt. Lewis Jacobson had saved his life once, pulled him out of a noose in Missouri after a train robbery gone sideways, spoke on his behalf to the judge, got him work, gave him purpose, and Thomas repaid that kindness by vanishing when the Granger gang rode into town. When the bullet started, he wasn't there, and Lewis died alone. Thomas struck the flint and lit the fuse, watching it snake up into the rock crevice. He had one shot, one bang to scatter them. But what came after? That was where it got murky. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the gang or the woman they took. Cynthia Jacobson. He remembered her from years ago when Lewis first brought her into town. Bright-eyed, proud, dangerous in the way women sometimes are when they believe too deeply in justice. She had a voice like quiet thunder, and eyes that could strip a man bare. Thomas had stayed away, kept his distance. She belonged to a better man, but he remembered her, always. Now she was a widow, now she was alone, and he was about to kill for her. The blast came like thunder cracking the spine of the world. Rock erupted above the pass, raining dust and stone. Horses screamed, men shouted. Thomas was already moving, rifle up, boots sliding down the shale as he closed the distance. He didn't aim to be a hero. Heroes got graves. He just wanted her out of there. He found them in chaos. 1 horse down, 2 men pinned beneath broken limbs. Lee Granger still mounted, pistol drawn, eyes wide with rage. And there she was, tied, but not cowed. Cynthia looked straight at him as he stepped through the smoke. Her face was streaked with dirt, her lips split, but her chin was high. He'd seen men break under less. She hadn't. "Cut her loose!" he barked. Granger wheeled on him. "Boone? You son of a—" The rifle cracked. Granger's hat flew. He tumbled backward off his horse, not dead, but rattled. Thomas dropped beside her, knife in hand. "You all right?" She didn't answer, just stared at him like she was trying to remember what kind of man he used to be. He sliced through the cords. Her wrists came free. Blood rushed to her hands. She winced, but didn't cry out. "I had it handled," she muttered. He smirked. "Sure looked like it." Gunfire cracked behind them. Thomas grabbed her arm and they ran, through the dust, into the trees, away from the ghosts. Behind them, the canyon echoed with screams. Ahead, only darkness, and the beginning of something neither of them could name. The woods pressed in like a noose. Thomas and Cynthia moved fast and quiet, ducking low through thick brush as the dying flames of the blast flickered behind them. Cynthia's wrists still burned from the ropes. Her dress, torn at the hem, clung to her legs with sweat and soot. Her breath came hard and fast, but her eyes, those stayed sharp. They didn't speak, not yet. The forest was alive with chaos. Horses shrieked, men shouted in the dark, stumbling over broken limbs and boulders. Gunshots cracked like branches snapping under weight. One bullet whined past Thomas's head, biting into a pine trunk with a dull thunk. He grabbed her hand and yanked her behind a fallen log. They hit the ground hard. Cynthia let out a sharp gasp but didn't complain. "Can you run?" he asked. She wiped blood from her lip. "You already seen I can fight. Don't ask stupid questions." Thomas smirked. Damn, she had fire. Even half broken, she was more grit than most men he'd known. They waited for the yelling to fade. Then they ran. Half a mile up the slope, Thomas led her to a narrow cleft in the rock, an old hunter's cave, barely big enough for two. He crouched first, checking for snakes, then motioned her inside. Cynthia crawled in behind him, her breath hitching as she collapsed against the stone wall. Inside, it was cold and close. The smell of damp earth filled the air. A shaft of moonlight cut through the rocks, slicing across her face. Her hair was wild, her cheeks streaked with dirt, and still she was beautiful in a way that hurt. Thomas turned away, jaw tight. He pulled off his coat and handed it to her. She didn't thank him, just slipped it on with shaking fingers. Minutes passed before either spoke. Finally, Cynthia broke the silence. "How long were you watching?" "Long enough." "To do what? Wait for them to kill me?" He flinched. "No, I was trying to find the right moment. Should have come sooner." Thomas looked at her, the pain on his face clear. "If I had, you might be dead. I needed them scattered. That was the only way." She didn't respond, just stared at the dirt floor, jaw working like she was chewing rocks. Thomas sat beside her, not too close. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not being there. For not stopping them when it counted." Cynthia's lips parted, but she didn't speak right away. Instead, she turned her head and looked at him. Really looked. In the dark, he seemed older, wearier. Not just from years, but from regret that settled into a man's bones like winter. "Why'd you do it?" she asked quietly. "Why come back for me?" He hesitated. "Because I owed your husband," he said finally. "But also, because I couldn't live with myself if I let you die." Her brow furrowed. "You knew him. You rode with him, didn't you?" Thomas nodded once. Before he put a badge on. "And now?" "I ride with guilt." She looked away. "Well, it's riding shotgun with me, too." Silence fell again, thicker this time. But something shifted. Not softer, just clearer. Shared pain had a way of building bridges where words failed. Outside, the gang still searched. Inside, the cave pulsed with tension. Cynthia's hand brushed his as they sat, and neither pulled away. The touch was small, accidental maybe, but it sent a bolt through them both. Neither of them said anything, but in that cold, silent space, something old and dangerous began to stir. The morning light cut through the trees like a blade, golden and sharp, burning off the chill but not the tension. Cynthia sat by the mouth of the cave, legs drawn up, Thomas's coat still wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was a tangled mess, blood crusted at her temple, but her eyes were steady as she stared into the woods, searching, watching, calculating. Thomas crouched nearby, checking the last of his traps. He'd laid a few in the night, nooses and tripwires strung between trees. They wouldn't stop the Granger boys for long, but maybe they'd slow them down. The quiet between them wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that sat on your chest and didn't let go. "I counted 4 last night," she said finally, "after the blast." He nodded. "Could be more. Could be less. They scatter easy when bullets fly." "I want to kill Lee Granger." Thomas looked up, not surprised. "I figured." He smiled when he knocked me down. She didn't blink. like he enjoyed it. Thomas stood and walked over, lowering himself beside her. He studied the woods, hands resting on the butt of his rifle. "I can help you get him," he said. "But you need to know, he doesn't break easy. That man's been chewed up and spit out more times than I can count. Got scars in places only the devil can see." Cynthia's lip curled. "Good. I hope it hurts." He looked at her. "It will." The wind shifted. A twig snapped somewhere down the slope. Both of them froze. Thomas reached out, slow and silent, and pulled her behind the boulder near the cave mouth. He crouched low, rifle steady, eyes scanning the tree line. Cynthia could hear her own breath. She hated it, how loud it sounded in her ears, hated how her body trembled even as her mind screamed for stillness. Then came the voice. "Boone, we know you're up there." It was Slater, the mean-eyed one with the scar that cut across his lip. His voice bounced off the pines like a whip crack. "Ain't no sense hidin'. You got the woman. We got your horse. Let's talk." Thomas didn't move, didn't speak. Another voice rose behind Slater's. "You think she's worth dying for, Boone? Ain't no woman ever is. Come down now, and we might even let you ride away." Cynthia clenched her jaw. Her hand drifted toward Thomas's knife where it lay in the dirt. Thomas gave her a look. Small shake of the head. "Not yet." The woods went quiet again, then chaos. A boot caught the tripwire. A snare snapped. A man yelped, then screamed. Gunfire erupted. Slater cursed. Someone yelled, "Ambush!" even though it wasn't. Thomas burst from cover and dropped to one knee, firing once, twice. A shadow fell from the ridge, arms flailing, then went still. Another shot cracked through the trees and sent splinters flying. Cynthia ran. Not away, from behind. She circled wide like she'd watched Lewis do a dozen times during drills. She grabbed a broken branch, thick and jagged. Found one of the gang tangled in brush, trying to reload. She didn't hesitate. The branch came down hard. Once. Twice. Blood sprayed her dress. The man didn't move again. Thomas spotted her and froze. Not from fear, but awe. She was fighting like someone who'd already died once. Lee Granger's whistle cut through the trees, a retreat signal. The remaining men fell back, scrambling down the ridge, not gone, just scattered, for now. Thomas met Cynthia in the clearing, rifle still hot. She stood there, blood on her face, chest heaving. "You all right?" he asked. She wiped her mouth and looked down at the man she'd killed, then back up at Thomas. "I ain't the same woman I was yesterday." Thomas nodded. "Neither am I." They walked back to the cave, leaving footprints in blood and pine needles. The sky was turning silver when they found shelter again, an abandoned trapper's shack tucked into the folds of the hills. The place was falling in on itself, roof sagging like tired shoulders, walls split by time and weather. But it had a door, a fire pit. 4 walls to bleed in if needed. Cynthia stepped in first, rifle in hand now. She didn't hesitate to clear the corners, didn't flinch at the shadows. Thomas watched her from the door, how she moved, how she breathed. She was changing by the hour, sharpening. He followed her in, closing the door behind them. The air smelled like mold and pine sap, but it was dry. A single cot leaned in the corner, mattress half-rotted, springs rusted out. Thomas dropped his saddlebag and crouched near the hearth, working to get a flame going. Cynthia didn't sit. She paced, tight, angry circles like a lion in a cage. After a minute, she said, "You knew, didn't you?" He stopped, looked up. "Knew what?" She pulled the bundle of letters from inside her dress, tucked there since the night before. She unwrapped them with fingers that barely trembled. Inside was the folded piece of paper Lewis had hidden, the one with names, dates, amounts. She handed it to Thomas. "You knew about this." He took it slowly, read it like it still hurt. "I did." "How long?" Thomas looked at the fire. "Since before Lewis died." Cynthia stepped back like he'd struck her. "He was trying to take them down," she said. "That's what this is. It's a map. Every name on here, people in town. Sheriff Durling, the bank manager. Hell, even the damn undertaker. They were all getting paid." Thomas nodded. "Land swindles, smuggling, protection cuts. Lewis wanted it all on paper." "Why didn't he tell me?" "Because he knew what it would cost." Her hands curled into fists. "He died anyway." Thomas stood now. He didn't speak until he was close enough to see the flicker in her eyes. "He thought if he gave it to me I could protect you. You didn't." "I failed," he said. "But I'm still here. Still trying." She turned away, jaw tight. "It wasn't just a ledger," she whispered. "He left me out of it all. Kept it secret, like I couldn't handle it." Thomas stepped closer. "Maybe he thought you'd be safer." "Safer doesn't mean stronger," she snapped. "And I was strong, damn it. I am strong." "I know." She looked at him then, eyes blazing. "Do you?" Their faces were inches apart now. The tension between them was no longer just anger. It was something hotter, deeper, dangerous. Thomas reached out slowly and brushed her cheek with the back of his fingers. "I see you," he said. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, swallowed the lump in her throat, then pulled away. "Don't make this about feelings, Boone. Not now. Not yet." He nodded. "Fair." She went to the corner and sank onto the cot, the paper still clenched in her hand. Her voice came softer now, frayed at the edges. "This changes everything." Thomas sat by the fire. "It changes the target, but not the goal." "And what's that?" "Justice," he said. "For Lewis, for you, maybe even for me." Cynthia stared at the firelight flickering on the walls. Her fingers traced the names on the paper like a prayer. "I want them to pay. They will. I want them to beg. They won't. Then I want to bury them." Thomas looked at her, flames dancing in his eyes. "Then we start tomorrow." Outside the wind carried the sound of distant hooves, but inside that shack vengeance had already taken root, and it would grow like fire. The smell hit them before they saw the flames, burnt hay, scorched leather, and something darker underneath. Cynthia reined her horse hard at the rise, eyes wide as she stared down into the basin. "Thomas," she said, voice low but shaking. Below, the old barn blazed like a beacon in the night. Thomas kicked his mount forward. "That's my supply stash," he growled. "My saddles, my spare rifles, our way back." The fire crackled and roared, licking at the black sky. The barn doors groaned and collapsed inward, sparks spitting into the night like angry wasps. "No," Cynthia said. "It ain't just about burning your gear." She pointed. At the edge of the trees, barely visible in the dancing firelight, stood a lone figure on horseback, watching, silent. The flame shimmered off a silver belt buckle and long coat. Lee Granger. Thomas pulled his rifle but didn't shoot. Not yet. He knew a trap when he saw one. The bastard wasn't alone. He was bait. Somewhere in the trees there'd be rifles aimed right back. Cynthia stepped beside him, hair lit orange by the blaze. "What's he want?" Thomas narrowed his eyes. "He wants us on foot, cornered and rattled." "Well, he's halfway there." Thomas's jaw tightened. "We need to go. Now." They turned their horses back into the brush, ducking low and circling the ridgeline. They rode hard for 20 minutes, the fire at their backs, until the air no longer stank of smoke. They dismounted in a dry creek bed, hidden beneath a curtain of overhanging branches. Cynthia tied the reins with trembling fingers. Thomas watched her quietly. "You all right?" She didn't answer, just pulled her shawl tighter and turned away. "He's not going to stop," she said. "He burned our way out. He wants to break us." She faced him again, eyes fierce. "Then why aren't we breaking him?" Thomas looked down, pulled something from his coat. The ledger. Cynthia's breath caught. He flipped it open to the first page, where Lewis had drawn a crude map of Peterson Hill. Names were circled: Durling, Horace from the bank, a rancher named Boyle. "He was going to take it to the U.S. Marshal in Deadwood," Thomas said. "Wanted them to bring the law down on the whole damn town." "Why didn't he?" "He didn't make it that far." Cynthia's voice dropped. "You said he gave this to you." "He did." She stepped closer, her voice hard. "And you just... what? Sat on it?" Thomas looked up. "I tried to forget it." "Forget my husband's murder?" "No," he snapped. "Forget the man I used to be, the one who did worse than forget, who helped Granger run the routes, who took cuts off the ledgers before Lewis ever saw them. That man doesn't deserve to hold this." Cynthia's silence was a fist in the chest. Thomas held the ledger out to her. "I kept it because I didn't know what else to do. But you know, you've always known, so take it." She stared at him, at the book, at the weight of it. Finally she took it. "You're right," she said. "I do know." And in that moment Thomas saw something change behind her eyes, not just fire, strategy. She opened the book again, finger trailing along the names. "Durling's first," she whispered. "We make this public. We make it loud. And when it all burns, we make sure Granger is the last to fall, so he sees every name before his." Thomas stepped forward, close enough to smell smoke still clinging to her hair. "And what happens to us when it's over?" She looked up, that flicker of something between them sparking again. "If we're lucky," she said, "we walk away." "And if we're not?" She didn't blink. "Then we burn too." The morning sun rose over Peterson Hill like a judgment passed. Cynthia and Thomas didn't ride through the front gate. They walked in, side by side, leading their horses on foot like they belonged. The dust kicked off their boots, drifted through the air like old ghosts, settling on wooden signs and weathered faces peering out from behind curtains. Folks didn't say a word, didn't need to. The town's silence was heavier than any shout. Cynthia's dress was wrinkled and stained with soot, the hem frayed from travel and fight. Thomas's coat was torn at the sleeve, one side of his face still bruised from a night ambush they barely got out of. But it wasn't just the bruises that turned heads. It was the look in their eyes. They were no longer survivors. They were coming for answers. They made for the livery first, what was left of it. The barn had burned clean to the posts. Ash coated the ground like snow, and the air still smelled of oil and vengeance. A single horse stood tied out front, nervously pawing the ground. Thomas looked around, jaw clenched. "No one's rebuilding. No one even trying." Cynthia stared at the smoldered remains. "Because they knew it'd burn. Everyone here's already picked a side." Behind them the saloon doors creaked open. Out stepped Horace Greeley, the bank manager turned drunkard turned coward. He straightened his vest when he saw them, but his face drained white. "Miss Jacobson," he said stiffly. "Mr. Boone, I thought you'd left." "Is that what you hoped?" Cynthia asked. He tried to smile. "No, of course not. I mean..." She pulled the ledger from her satchel and opened it slowly, as if the very act was sacred. "Lewis had your name written down 3 times, she said, loud enough for the porch dwellers to hear. 3 separate amounts, all tied to land deeds that don't exist anymore. Horace's throat bobbed. Now hold on. You were laundering their money, she said, right through the bank, through your hands. That's a damn lie. Thomas stepped forward. You calling Marshal Jacobson a liar? Horace shut up quick. Sweat bloomed under his collar. Cynthia turned to the growing crowd. You all know it. You've known it for months, maybe longer. But not one of you had the backbone to say it. Cynthia, a soft voice said from behind. She turned. It was Nora Bell, the schoolteacher, younger, honest once, until she married the sheriff. I didn't know everything, Nora said. Only pieces. You knew enough, Cynthia replied coldly. Nora's lip trembled. I was scared. We all are. Silence stretched, tight as piano wire. Then came the metallic jangle of spurs. Sheriff Emmett Durling stepped out of his office, shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. He moved slow, careful, like a man who'd already played the end of this scene in his head. Well, he said, ain't this a fine gathering? Thomas tensed. Cynthia didn't flinch. Emmett, she said, voice hard, we both know what's in this ledger. He shrugged. What I know is that you're stirring up dust. Old dust. Dangerous dust. I'm not here to stir, she said. I'm here to clean. He laughed once. A short, bitter sound. You think folks'll stand behind you? This town? They'll turn their backs the second it gets bloody. She held the ledger out like it was a sword. Then let 'em turn. But they'll know the truth before they do. The townspeople watched with hollow eyes, silent, waiting to see who would fall first. Durling's fingers twitched near the trigger. Thomas shifted, hand on his holster. Cynthia took a single step forward. You want to shoot me, Sheriff? Do it in front of them all, right here, right now. Let the whole town see whose law you really serve. A long, hot second passed. Then Durling dropped the shotgun to the dirt. He turned, walked back into his office without a word. The door slammed shut. No one moved. No one cheered. But the silence that followed, it was different now. It wasn't cowardice anymore. It was awakening. They made camp just outside the canyon rim, far enough from town to breathe, close enough to watch it choke. Cynthia sat near the fire, her back against a rock, eyes fixed on the flames like she was waiting for them to confess. The ledger lay open across her lap, pages fluttering in the night breeze. Thomas stood a few feet away, staring off into the trees, chewing on guilt like old jerky. Neither spoke for a while. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind you keep when there's something you don't want to say. Finally, Cynthia broke it. There's a name missing. Thomas didn't turn. She looked up at him. Yours. He said nothing. I went through every page, she continued. Granger marked his men, Durling's cuts, the banker's lies, but not you. He rubbed his jaw, still not facing her. That's 'cause I wasn't taking money. But you were part of it. His shoulders dropped like he'd been hit. Yeah. Then why leave you out? Thomas turned then, slow, like the truth was hanging off his back. Because I didn't work for him. Cynthia stood, the fire cracked between them. I rode with him, Thomas said. But I wasn't loyal. I passed information to Lewis. Quietly. Notes left in saddlebags, conversations overheard. I gave him everything I could without putting a bullet in my own spine. Cynthia stared, stunned. You were a spy? He nodded. She stepped closer. Why didn't you tell me? Because I failed him. His voice dropped to gravel. Because the last thing Lewis ever did was save my neck, and I repaid that by letting him ride into that ambush alone. She shook her head. You didn't know. I did, he snapped. I knew they were planning something. I just didn't think they'd act so fast. I thought I had time. She went quiet. Her hands tightened around the ledger. "I kept this from you," he said, "because I was ashamed. And because I figured if I could help you finish what he started, maybe it'd balance the scales." She walked around the fire and stood in front of him. "But you let me believe Lewis died clean. You let me put him on a pedestal." "He earned it," Thomas said, "even if he made mistakes." "You think I couldn't handle the truth?" I didn't want you to hate me for being part of it." She looked at him a long time, eyes full of something that wasn't quite anger, but close. "I don't hate you," she whispered. He looked up. "I hate that you let me stand at that grave not knowing." Her voice cracked. She turned away. I needed to believe in him. Thomas stepped forward. "You still can." "I don't want half-truths," she said, facing him again. "Not from you, not now. I want the whole damn thing." He met her gaze, steady, silent. Then slowly he unbuttoned his coat and pulled a crumpled letter from inside. The paper was old, the ink faded. He handed it to her. Cynthia opened it. It was from Lewis. "Boone, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. Don't let Cynthia bury me in lies. She's stronger than I ever deserved. Show her what we were fighting for. Show her who I really was. And if you can, protect her. She's the only thing I ever got right." Cynthia's hands trembled. She looked at Thomas. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Start with this," he said. "We've still got names on that list, and Granger's not done." She folded the letter with care, like it might fall apart if touched wrong. When she looked back up, her face was different, harder, but clearer. "We finish it," she said. "Then I decide if you're a part of what comes next." Thomas nodded. "Fair enough." They sat side by side after that. No more lies. Just firelight, cold air, and the weight of everything unsaid now laid bare. The wind howled through hollow rock like a war cry. It was a narrow gorge with steep walls carved by centuries of flash floods, the kind of place locals whispered about in bar rooms but never entered after sundown. A natural bottleneck, a place where riders got swallowed if they weren't watching the sky. It was also where Cynthia Jacobson had chosen to make her final stand. They arrived just after first light. Thomas pulled the horses into a thicket of mesquite just off the trail and nodded toward the canyon's mouth. "They'll come through there." Cynthia studied the rock formation, eyes cold and clear. "And they won't be expecting us. They'll think we're running." She tightened the leather strap on her rifle. "Then let's disappoint them." They spent the morning rigging the high ledges. Thomas buried sticks of dynamite inside crevices above the trail, leftover rail powder he'd hoarded for years. Cynthia helped, hands steady as she packed dry brush for cover. She didn't flinch once. "Boone," she said as they finished the last fuse. He looked over, sweat dripping from his brow. "If I don't make it out of here, promise me you'll burn that ledger." He hesitated. "I thought you wanted justice." "I do," she said. "But I don't want my husband remembered for what he couldn't fix. Only for what he tried to." Thomas nodded. "Then we make sure there's no one left to tell it wrong." By midday, the trap was set. They waited behind a jagged outcrop that overlooked the pass. The sun beat down like a curse. Buzzards circled far overhead, as if they knew what was coming. And then, hooves. The Granger gang thundered into the canyon with 5 riders at the lead. Lee Granger at the front, face calm, confident. Like a man riding toward a prize, not a fight. Cynthia steadied her rifle on the rock's edge. "You ready?" Thomas whispered. Her eyes never left the trail. "Pull the fuse." He did. A second passed, then another, then hell opened up. The blast echoed through the canyon like God slamming a door. Rock exploded from both sides of the pass, burying the rear horses and scattering the rest. Screams cut the air. 2 men were down before they even knew where to look. Cynthia fired. Her bullet hit the chest of the man beside Granger, throwing him sideways off his saddle. Thomas leapt down from the rocks, shooting as he slid. 1 man got up. Thomas dropped him with a round to the gut. The rest scattered into the smoke. Cynthia climbed down fast, boots slipping, rifle swinging across her back. She hit the ground running. Granger was still up, barely. He staggered behind a boulder, blood on his coat, pistol in hand. "You ain't law," he shouted through the dust. "You ain't justice." "No," Cynthia called back. "I'm what's left when justice runs dry." He fired. The bullet grazed her arm, ripping through her sleeve. She didn't stop. Thomas flanked him, emerging from the opposite side. "Drop it, Lee," he said. Granger turned, gun twitching, finger tightening on the trigger. Cynthia stepped into the open, aiming square at his chest. "Don't," Thomas growled. Granger smiled, teeth bloodied. "You don't get to tell me how I die, Boone." He turned his pistol toward Cynthia. Her shot hit him before he could fire. He dropped like a stone. The canyon fell quiet. Thomas walked over, checked for a pulse. "Dead." Cynthia stared down at the body, the smoke, the shattered rock, the ash blowing in the canyon wind. Then she pulled the ledger from her coat and dropped it beside him. She lit a match. The flames licked the edges of the paper, curling them, eating away the names, the lies, the legacy. "Let them write their own history now," she said. Thomas watched her. "You sure?" She nodded, and then, finally, she exhaled. The fire behind her, the sun above them, and the road ahead, for the first time in a long while, empty. The desert wind blew soft, carrying with it the scent of sage and ash. Cynthia and Thomas rode slow, side by side, letting the silence stretch between them like the long road ahead. Neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because too much had already been spoken in the language of bullets, betrayal, and fire. The land rolled out before them in amber waves, dry gulches, scattered brush, distant ridge lines that cut the horizon like broken glass. Behind them, Peterson Hill lay quiet, smoldering in its guilt, stripped of the lies it had used to prop itself up for years. Thomas glanced sideways at her. Cynthia's eyes were fixed forward, jaw set, wind tugging at strands of her hair. She looked older now, not in age, but in the weight she carried, like someone who had walked through the center of hell and emerged with the smoke still on her skin. He cleared his throat. "You still thinking about what comes next?" Cynthia nodded but didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was tired but steady. "I don't reckon there's a map for this part." Thomas gave a faint smile. "We burned the one we had." Maybe that's what needed to happen. They rode in silence for another mile. Then Cynthia spoke again, quieter this time. "I miss him, you know, even knowing what he did, even with the lies." "I know." She looked over at Thomas. "You ever miss the man you used to be?" "All the time," he said. "But I don't reckon I liked him much." "I think I hate mine," she said. "The woman who thought justice meant everything, who thought doing right meant everything would turn out right." Thomas shifted in his saddle. "You ain't that woman anymore." "No," Cynthia replied, almost to herself. "I'm not." They came to a shallow creek, the water low and lazy from the summer heat. Both horses stopped to drink, dipping their heads low, steam rising from their flanks. Cynthia dismounted and crouched by the water's edge, scooping a handful to splash across her face. The cold bit into her skin and left her blinking. Thomas stayed on his horse, watching her. "You think you'll stay in Deadwood once we get there?" he asked. She stood and wiped her face with the hem of her sleeve. Maybe. Might be far enough away that my name don't carry so much weight. You could start over. She looked up at him. Could you? Thomas hesitated. I don't know if I ever really started in the first place. She chuckled, the sound dry and raw. That sounds about right. He dismounted and stepped closer, boots crunching softly in the sand. I'm not asking for anything, he said. Not promises, not forgiveness. If you don't want to ride alone. Cynthia turned to face him. The wind lifted her hair, brushing it across her cheek. There was a long pause, the kind that felt like a coin spinning mid-air. I don't want to ride alone, she said finally. A few seconds passed before she added, Not anymore. Thomas nodded. They saddled back up and started down the creek bed, hooves splashing lightly in the water. The sun dipped lower, casting the world in honey and shadow. Behind them, the trail was dust and smoke. Ahead of them, just quiet. They didn't need to speak. Not now. They'd lived the storm, buried the past, and bled for the truth. Whatever came next, they'd ride into it together. Two broken souls. Two loaded pasts. But with a chance, however small, that the next mile might be the one that finally felt free. And in the west, where the sky burned gold, the horizon waited with open arms. Thank you for riding with us. If this story stirred something deep in your chest, if you felt the dust, the fire, and the weight of every choice made, then don't ride off just yet. Subscribe to SaddleHorn Stories for more hard-hitting Western tales told with grit, heart, and truth. Like this video if you believe justice ain't always clean, but it's always worth the fight. And drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from and what moment hit hardest. This trail's just getting started, friend. More stories are coming, and they don't pull punches.